Catherine's fingers clawed through the dirt, leaving trails of blood in the prairie grass. She couldn't see from her left eye anymore. Couldn't feel her legs. Her husband's boots had done their work well. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please, somebody." Thomas had promised to love her. Instead, he'd left her here to die like an animal. But somewhere on that empty trail, a horse was coming, and the man riding it would make sure Thomas Norwood faced justice he never saw coming. If you want to know how this story ends, subscribe to my channel and follow Catherine's journey to the very last word. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far her story travels. The woman's hand moved first. Xavier Nash pulled Rusty to a hard stop, his eyes fixed on the tall grass 50 yards off the trail. Something had shifted out there, something that didn't belong. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his right hand already resting on his colt. Rusty snorted, ears pinned forward. The horse knew danger when he smelled it. Xavier had spent enough years on the frontier to trust that instinct. He'd seen ambushes set up just like this. A body in the grass, men waiting in the brush. He'd buried friends who'd fallen for the trick. But that hand moved again. Weak. Desperate. Reaching for help that wasn't coming. "Lord have mercy," Xavier breathed. He dismounted fast, keeping low as he approached. His boots crushed through the dry grass, and then he saw her. A woman, face down, dress torn and bloody. Honey blonde hair matted with something dark and wet. Xavier dropped to his knees beside her, his stomach turning at what he found. Ma'am, can you hear me?" she moaned, tried to lift her head, failed. Xavier gently turned her over and his jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. Her face was destroyed, left eye swollen completely shut, lip split wide open. Purple bruises covered every inch of skin he could see, and the marks on her throat. Someone had tried to strangle her before the beating. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he knew she couldn't answer. Her right eye fluttered open, blue as Montana sky filled with terror. "No?" she gasped, trying to push away from him. "No, please, Thomas, don't." "Easy now." Xavier kept his voice low and steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I ain't gonna hurt you. My name's Xavier Nash. I'm gonna get you to a doctor." The woman stared at him, confusion slowly replacing fear. You're not Thomas." "No, ma'am, I ain't Thomas." He pulled the canteen from his belt. "Can you drink?" She nodded weakly. Xavier lifted her head, helping her take small sips. Water dribbled down her chin, mixing with dried blood. "What's your name?" he asked. "Catherine." Her voice cracked. "Catherine Norwood." "All right, Catherine. I need to move you. It's gonna hurt, but I got no choice. Town's 2 hours east." "He'll find me." Fresh tears leaked from her good eye. "Thomas will find me. He always does." Xavier's hand stilled on the canteen. "Thomas, your husband." Catherine's silence was answer enough. Something cold and hard settled in Xavier's chest. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his 32 years. Outlaws who killed for sport. Indians who'd lost everything fighting back. Men who let whiskey turn them into monsters. But this was different. This was a man who'd beaten his own wife half to death and left her in the wilderness like unwanted cattle. "He ain't finding you tonight," Xavier said. "I give you my word on that." He fashioned a travois from branches, and his bedroll working fast as the sun dropped lower. Catherine drifted in and out, sometimes crying out when he moved her wrong. Sometimes so still he had to check she was breathing. When he finally got her secured, Xavier mounted Rusty and grabbed the travois poles. "Slow and steady, boy. We got precious cargo." The ride to Fort Benton took longer than 2 hours. Xavier couldn't risk moving fast, not with Catherine's condition. Every bump made her whimper. Every jolt sent fresh blood seeping through her torn dress. He talked to her the whole way. Nonsense mostly. Stories about cattle drives and bar fights, and the time he'd won a horse in a poker game. Anything to keep her conscious. anything to let her know she wasn't alone. "My pa was a circuit judge," he told her as the first lights of town appeared. "Used to say a man's worth is measured by how he treats those weaker than himself." He glanced back at her pale face. "Your husband's got a reckoning coming, Catherine. I promise you that." She didn't respond. She'd passed out again, somewhere in the last mile. Fort Benton had grown since Xavier's last visit. New buildings lined the main street. Steamboats crowded the river landing. Progress had come to the frontier, though it hadn't brought much in the way of decency. Xavier rode straight to the white clapboard building he remembered. Light still burned in the windows. "Doc Wilson." He pounded on the door. "I need help out here." The door swung open. A man in his 50s stood there, spectacles catching the lamplight. What in God's name? "Found her on the trail. Beaten bad. She's been in and out." Dr. Wilson's eyes widened as he took in Catherine's condition. "Sarah, get the examining room ready." A woman appeared behind him, gray-streaked hair pinned back tight. She took one look at the travois and pressed a hand to her mouth. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered. "That's Catherine Norwood." Xavier's head snapped toward her. "You know her." "Everyone knows her. She's married to Thomas Norwood, owns the Mercantile on Main Street." Sarah's face had gone pale. "Bring her inside, quickly." They carried Catherine to the examining table. In the bright lamplight, her injuries looked even worse. "Doctor." Wilson began his assessment, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. Cracked ribs, possible concussion, defensive wounds on her forearms. He looked up at Xavier. "You said you found her on the trail." "About 2 hours east. She was alone. No horse, no wagon, nothing." "Someone left her there." "Reckon so." Sarah was cleaning blood from Catherine's face, her movements gentle, but her eyes hard. "Samuel, look at her arms. These bruises are old. Weeks old, some of them." Dr. Wilson examined the marks and let out a long breath. This wasn't the first time. Xavier's fists clenched at his sides. "She said a name when she came to. Thomas. Asked me not to hurt her no more." The doctor and his wife exchanged a look that told Xavier everything. "There's been talk," Sarah said quietly. "Catherine's come in before with injuries. Always had an explanation. Fell down the stairs. Dropped something heavy on herself." "And you believed her?" Xavier couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "What were we supposed to do?" Dr. Wilson's tone was defensive, but shame flickered in his eyes. "A woman doesn't accuse her husband of such things. Not if she wants to keep living in this town." "Looks to me like she wasn't going to keep living much longer either way." The doctor had no answer for that. Xavier stayed through the night. He told himself it was because Catherine might need protection. Told himself Thomas Norwood could show up any minute looking for his wife. But the truth was simpler than that. He couldn't leave her. Something about finding her out there broken and abandoned had hooked into his chest and wouldn't let go. Maybe it was the way she'd fought to live when anyone else would have given up. Maybe it was remembering his stepmother's flinching fear, the way she'd never stopped looking over her shoulder even after her first husband was in the ground. Whatever it was, Xavier Nash wasn't going anywhere until Catherine Norwood was safe. She woke just before dawn. Xavier heard her gasp and was on his feet before his eyes fully opened. Sarah reached her first pressing gentle hands on her shoulders. "Easy, dear. You're safe. You're at Dr. Wilson's." Catherine's good eye darted around the room wild with panic. When it landed on Xavier, she flinched. "It's all right," Sarah said. "This is the man who found you, Mr. Nash. He brought you here last night." Recognition slowly replaced fear. Catherine's body relaxed, though her hands still trembled against the sheets. "I remember," she whispered. You talked to me. The whole ride." Xavier stepped closer, hat in hand. "Didn't know if you could hear me, ma'am. Just wanted you to know you weren't alone." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks. She didn't seem to notice. "Thomas," she said. "Where is—" "Don't know. Don't care. Xavier's voice was harder than he'd intended. He softened it. He ain't here. That's what matters. He'll come. Catherine closed her eye. He'll find out I'm alive, and he'll come. Then I'll be here when he does. Catherine opened her eye again, studying him with an intensity that made Xavier uncomfortable. Why? Why what? Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me nothing. Xavier considered the question. He'd asked himself the same thing all night. My pa taught me that some things just need doing, he finally said. Man hurts a woman like that, leaves her to die in the grass. That ain't something I can ride away from. Most men would. I ain't most men. Something shifted in Catherine's expression. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself. He'll kill you if you get in his way, she said quietly. Thomas doesn't like obstacles. Xavier's jaw tightened. Reckon we'll see about that. Dr. Wilson appeared with a tray of broth and medicine. Mrs. Norwood, you need to rest. We can discuss everything else later. No. Catherine struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. I need to tell someone, before Thomas finds a way to silence me. She looked at Xavier, then at Sarah. I need to tell you what he did. Sarah took her hand. We know, dear. We can see. You don't know. Catherine's voice cracked. You don't know why. You don't know how long. A sob escaped her. 3 years. 3 years of breaking me down piece by piece. And last night? She couldn't continue. The tears came too fast. Sarah held her while she cried, murmuring soft words of comfort. Xavier stood helpless by the door, rage building in his chest like a brush fire. When Catherine finally spoke again, her voice was hollow. I found lipstick on his collar. That's all it was. A smudge of red on white cotton. A bitter laugh escaped her. I didn't even accuse him, just asked where it came from. She told them everything. How Thomas had grabbed the whiskey bottle from the table. How he'd smashed it against the wood and come at her with murder in his eyes. How she'd tried to run, tried to fight, tried to reason with him. He said I was ungrateful, said he'd given me everything, and I repaid him with suspicion. Catherine's hand moved to her throat, touching the bruises there. He choked me until I saw black spots. Then he used his fists. Xavier's nails dug into his palms. And after, I woke up in his wagon. It was dark. I couldn't see where we were going. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He stopped somewhere in the grass. Pulled me out like I was nothing. Told me I'd finally be useful feeding the coyotes. Dear God, Sarah breathed. I tried to crawl. Catherine's good eye met Xavier's. After he left, I tried to crawl toward the trail. I thought maybe someone would find me before. She couldn't finish, but she didn't have to. Xavier crossed the room and knelt beside her bed. Carefully, he took her hand. Listen to me, Catherine. What he did ain't your fault. None of it. You understand? She shook her head. I should have left sooner. Should have... Stop. His grip tightened gently. Man like that, he makes you think you can't leave. Makes you think you deserve what's coming. That's what they do. That's how they keep hold of you. Catherine stared at him. How do you know that? My stepmother. First husband beat her for years before he died. She carried that fear her whole life. Used to flinch when my pa raised his hand, even if he was just reaching for something on a shelf. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. She got away. She did. And so did you. Xavier stood, releasing her hand. Now we make sure Thomas Norwood pays for every mark he put on you. The sheriff. I'll handle the sheriff. Catherine grabbed his sleeve before he could turn away. Mr. Nash, Xavier. Her voice shook. Thomas has friends in this town. Important friends. The sheriff plays poker with him every Saturday night. I don't care if he plays poker with the president himself. Xavier covered her hand with his. I'm gonna get you justice, Catherine. I give you my word. For a long moment she searched his face. Looking for deception, maybe. Looking for the same lies Thomas had told her once. Whatever she found there made her release his sleeve. I believe you, she said softly. God help me, but I believe you. Xavier nodded once, sharp and sure. Rest now. I'll be back. He strode out of the doctor's office into the gray light of early morning. Fort Benton was just waking up. Shopkeepers swept their boardwalks. Wagons rumbled toward the river landing. Somewhere a dog barked at a passing rider. Normal sounds, normal day. Except nothing about this day was gonna be normal. Xavier had made a promise, and Xavier Nash kept his promises. He headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Roy Jenkins didn't look up when Xavier walked through the door. Office ain't open yet, he said, scratching something into a ledger book. Come back in an hour. This can't wait an hour. Something in Xavier's tone made the sheriff pause. He lifted his head, taking in the stranger standing in his doorway. Dust-covered, trail-worn, eyes that promised trouble. And who might you be? Xavier Nash. I brought a woman into town last night. Found her beaten half to death on the prairie about 2 hours east. Jenkins set down his pen. That's so. That's so. Her name's Catherine Norwood. Says her husband did it. The sheriff's expression shifted. Closed off. Guarded. Tom Norwood's wife. You know another Catherine Norwood in this town? Jenkins leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Mr. Nash, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, but domestic matters are complicated. Ain't nothing complicated about it. Xavier stepped closer to the desk. Man beat his wife unconscious, loaded her in a wagon, and dumped her in the grass to die. That ain't a domestic matter. That's attempted murder. That's a serious accusation. You want to see the evidence, go to Doc Wilson's. Look at her face. Look at her ribs. Look at the bruises around her neck where he choked her. Jenkins rubbed his jaw, avoiding Xavier's eyes. Mrs. Norwood say all this happened. She did. Well, the sheriff stood, moving to the window. Tom Norwood is a respected businessman in this town. Been here near 10 years. Built that mercantile from nothing. I don't care if he built the whole damn town. You should care. Jenkins turned to face him. This ain't like out there on the trail, Mr. Nash. There's rules here, procedures. I can't just arrest a man on his wife's say-so. Xavier's hands curled into fists. What about my say-so? I found her. I saw what he did. You saw a woman who'd been beaten. Could have been anyone did it. She named him, called out his name when I found her, begged me not to hurt her no more. Confusion? Trauma? Jenkins shrugged. Happens all the time. Xavier stared at the sheriff, understanding dawning cold and clear. You ain't gonna do nothing. I didn't say that. I said there's procedures. Jenkins moved back to his desk. I'll talk to Tom, get his side of things. Then we'll see where we stand. His side of things? Xavier laughed, but there was no humor in it. You gonna ask the wolf if he ate the sheep? Watch your tone, cowboy. Or what? You gonna arrest me for disrespecting a man who tried to murder his wife? The two men faced each other across the desk. The sheriff was bigger, older, used to his authority going unchallenged, but Xavier had stared down worse in his years on the frontier. I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that, Jenkins said slowly. On account of you being new here and not understanding how things work. But I'm only gonna pretend once. Xavier leaned forward, planting his hands on the desk. Then let me make sure you understand how things work, Sheriff. That woman is gonna testify to what her husband did. I'm gonna testify to where I found her. And if you don't do your job, I'll find someone who will. You threatening me? I'm making you a promise. Xavier straightened up. Same promise I made her. He turned and walked out before Jenkins could respond. The morning had brightened while he was inside, and Fort Benton had come fully alive. Xavier walked down the main street, taking stock of his surroundings. The Mercantile wasn't hard to spot. Biggest storefront on the block with Norwood's General Goods painted in gold letters above the door. Xavier considered going in confronting the man directly. But that would be foolish. He needed evidence, not a fistfight. Needed to build a case that even a crooked sheriff couldn't ignore. He needed to think like his father would have. First things first, find where Thomas had dumped Catherine, track his movements, look for witnesses. Xavier mounted Rusty and headed back east, toward the spot where he'd found her. The ride took less time in daylight. He recognized the place by the matted grass, the dark stains that hadn't been washed away by dew. Xavier dismounted and began walking a wide circle, reading the ground the way he'd learned tracking rustlers and bounty jumps. Wagon tracks. 2 horses. The wheels had stopped here, then turned around and headed back toward town. Xavier followed them backward, looking for anything else. 100 yards away, he found it. A broken whiskey bottle, half buried in the grass. Dark stains on the jagged edges. "Son of a bitch," Xavier muttered. He wrapped the bottle carefully in his bandana and tucked it in his saddlebag. Then he kept searching. More blood. A torn piece of fabric that matched Catherine's dress. Scuff marks where she'd been dragged from the wagon. The evidence was clear as day to anyone willing to look. Xavier spent another hour documenting everything he could find, fixing the details in his memory. Then he rode back to town, straight to the doctor's office. Catherine was sitting up when he entered, sipping broth from a cup Sarah held for her. The swelling in her face had gone down slightly, but the bruises had darkened to deep purple and black. She looked like she'd lost a fight with a mountain lion. "You're back," she said. Xavier removed his hat. "Told you I would be." "How'd it go with the sheriff?" "About how you'd expect." He pulled the wrapped bottle from his bag. "Found this where he left you. Blood on the glass. And I can testify to the wagon tracks, the drag marks, all of it." Catherine's hand shook, and broth sloshed over the cup's edge. Sarah took it from her gently. "He really did mean to kill me," Catherine whispered. "Part of me thought maybe he just lost his temper. Maybe he'd have come back." "He wasn't coming back." Xavier's voice was firm. "And we're gonna make sure he pays for that." The door opened behind him. Dr. Wilson entered, his expression troubled. "Mr. Nash, a word outside if you please." Xavier followed him onto the porch. The doctor closed the door carefully before speaking. "Sheriff Jenkins came by while you were gone." "That was fast." "He wanted to see Catherine. I told him she wasn't well enough for visitors." Wilson paused. "He wasn't happy about that." "I imagine not." "There's more." The doctor lowered his voice. "He went to the Mercantile afterward, talked to Thomas for near half an hour. Then they both went to the saloon." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Getting their story straight." "That's my assumption." Wilson looked at him directly. "Mr. Nash, I should tell you something about Thomas Norwood. About why people in this town look the other way." "I'm listening." 3 years ago, when Thomas first married Catherine, there was a man, a trapper named Wilkins, who'd taken a shine to her before Thomas came along. Wilson's voice dropped even lower. Wilkins made the mistake of telling Thomas he should treat his new bride better. 2 weeks later, Wilkins was found dead in the river, officially ruled an accident. And unofficially, everyone knows Thomas had him killed. But nobody could prove it. Nobody wanted to prove it. Xavier absorbed this information. "You're saying if I push this, I might end up in the river too." "I'm saying be careful. Thomas Norwood isn't just a man who beats his wife. He's a man who eliminates problems. I've dealt with dangerous men before. Not like this. Not with the whole town against you." Xavier looked out at the street where normal people went about their normal business, pretending they didn't know a monster lived among them. "Doc, how many times has Catherine come to you with injuries?" Wilson was quiet for a long moment. "7 times. That I know of." 7 times. And nobody said nothing. What could we say? She denied it. Every time she denied it. Because she was scared. Because nobody gave her reason to believe they'd help. Xavier turned back to the doctor. I'm giving her that reason now. Question is, are you with me or not? Wilson met his eyes. I should have spoken up years ago. I knew what was happening and I did nothing. If Catherine's willing to testify, I'll stand with her. I'll tell the court exactly what I've seen. Good. Xavier clapped him on the shoulder. Now I need you to write down everything. Every injury, every date, every excuse she gave. Put it all on paper. I can do that. And Doc, if the sheriff comes back, you keep stalling. Catherine ain't ready for visitors. Won't be ready until I say otherwise. Wilson nodded slowly. You're putting yourself in considerable danger, Mr. Nash. Story of my life. Xavier went back inside and found Catherine watching the door waiting for him. I heard some of that, she admitted. The walls are thin. Then you know what we're up against. I know. She pulled herself straighter in the bed, wincing at the movement. Mr. Nash Xavier, I need to tell you something. What is it? Thomas has a ledger, keeps it in the safe at the store. It's got records of things, payments to people, names, dates. Her voice dropped. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I saw him writing in it once. He was so angry when he caught me looking. What kind of payments? I don't know exactly, but I heard him talking to someone once late at night. A man I didn't recognize. Thomas was laughing, saying the sheriff was the best investment he'd ever made. Xavier went very still. He's paying off Jenkins. I think so, and maybe others. There's a judge too. They play cards together at the hotel every month. Judge Parker. Catherine nodded. Thomas always wins. Always. Even though he's terrible at cards. The pieces were coming together now. Not just a wife-beater, but something bigger. A man who'd bought himself protection, built a web of corruption that kept him safe no matter what he did. That ledger, Xavier said slowly. If we could get our hands on it, he'd kill us both. He's already tried to kill you once. Catherine's hand found her grip surprisingly strong for someone so battered. You don't have to do this. You could ride out of here. Forget you ever found me. No one would blame you. Xavier looked at her bruised face, her swollen eye, the finger marks still visible on her throat. He thought about his father, who'd spent his life bringing justice to people who couldn't get it for themselves. He thought about his stepmother, who'd lived in fear until the day she died. I'd blame me, he said simply. And that's enough. A commotion outside made them both turn toward the window. Raised voices, heavy footsteps on the boardwalk. Catherine. A man's voice boomed from outside. I know you're in there. Every trace of color drained from Catherine's face. Thomas. Xavier was at the door before she could say another word. He stepped onto the porch and found himself facing a man he recognized from the mercantile window. Thomas Norwood was bigger than he'd seemed behind the counter, broader. His face was red with drink or rage, maybe both. Sheriff Jenkins stood behind him, looking uncomfortable but making no move to intervene. Who the hell are you? Thomas demanded. Name's Xavier Nash. I'm the one who found your wife. Then you're the one who needs to step aside. I'm taking my wife home. Don't reckon she wants to go home with you. Thomas's eyes narrowed. What happens in my house is my business. Wasn't in your house. Was in the middle of the prairie where you left her to die. That's a lie. Thomas's voice rose, playing to the crowd that had started gathering on the street. My wife was attacked by road agents. I've been worried sick about her. That why you didn't report her missing. That why you're here smelling like whiskey instead of out looking for whoever done it. Thomas took a step forward. I don't have to explain myself to some drifter. You'll explain yourself to a judge one way or another. The two men stood toe-to-toe, now close enough that Xavier could see the rage burning in Thomas's eyes, close enough to smell the alcohol on his breath, close enough to see his knuckles scraped and bruised, just like Catherine had said. Sheriff, Thomas said without breaking eye contact with Xavier, Remove this man from the premises." Jenkins shuffled forward reluctantly. "Mr. Nash, maybe you better—" "I ain't going nowhere. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I ain't the one making it hard." Xavier raised his voice so the gathering crowd could hear. "This man beat his wife unconscious and left her for dead. I found her myself 2 hours east of here. She's inside right now looking like she went 10 rounds with a grizzly. And now he wants to take her home so he can finish what he started." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, knowing glances the kind that said they'd suspected something like this for a long time. Thomas's face went purple with rage. "You son of a—" "Thomas!" Dr. Wilson appeared in the doorway. "My patient is not to be disturbed. Sheriff, I must insist you clear this crowd. Doc, this man has my wife. Mrs. Norwood is under my care. She has serious injuries that require rest and medical attention. She will not be moved. I have rights." Thomas lunged forward, but Xavier blocked his path. "Touch that door," Xavier said quietly, "and I'll put you in the ground." For a long moment, nobody moved. The crowd held its breath. Even Jenkins seemed frozen, uncertain what to do. Then Thomas smiled. It was worse than his rage, cold, calculating, full of dark promise. "You've made a mistake," he said softly. "A very serious mistake. Wouldn't be my first." Thomas straightened his coat and turned to address the crowd. "My wife has clearly suffered a terrible ordeal. I only want to see her to comfort her. This stranger is keeping me from my own wife." Some sympathetic murmurs came from the crowd. A woman near the back called out, "Let the man see his wife." But others stayed silent, their eyes moving between Thomas's composed face and the doctor's office door, putting pieces together they'd ignored for years. "I'll be back," Thomas said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "With papers, legal papers. We'll see how long this charade continues." He turned and walked away, the crowd parting before him. Sheriff Jenkins hesitated, shot Xavier a warning look, then followed. Sarah Wilson appeared at Xavier's elbow. "She needs you." Xavier found Catherine sitting up in bed, her good eye wild with fear. "He's gone," he told her. "For now. He'll be back. You heard him. He'll get papers, he'll get the judge. Then we move faster than he does." Xavier sat on the edge of her bed. "That ledger you mentioned, is there any way to get to it?" "The safe. It's in his office behind the store. He keeps the key on him always." "What about at night? Does he sleep with it?" Catherine thought for a moment. "No, he puts his coat on the hook by the bedroom door. The key would be in the pocket." "You could get it?" "If I could walk, maybe. But Xavier, even if we got the ledger, Thomas has copies of everything. He's careful that way." "Copies where?" "I don't know. Somewhere safe. He always said if anything happened to him, certain people would get certain letters." She shuddered. He thought it was funny having that kind of power over everyone. Xavier stood and paced the small room. "Think," he told himself. "Think like Pa would. The ledger ain't enough on its own," he said slowly. "But it might be enough to turn some people. If Jenkins knew his name was in there, knew other folks might see it. He'd never betray Thomas. He would if he thought the ship was sinking. Rats always run when the water starts rising." Catherine watched him pace, something like hope flickering in her battered face. "You really think we can beat him?" "I think we don't got a choice but to try." Xavier stopped by the window, watching the street where Thomas had stood moments before. "But I'm gonna need help. Someone in this town who ain't in his pocket." "There's the Reverend," Catherine offered. "Reverend Mills at the Methodist Church. He's only been here 6 months. Thomas hasn't had time to get to him yet." "A preacher. That could work." Xavier turned back to her. "You trust him." "I don't trust anyone anymore." A tear slid down Catherine's cheek. "Except you. And I don't even understand why." Xavier crossed to her bedside and took her hand. "Because you know I got nothing to gain from this. No stake in your husband's business, no debts to pay, no favors to collect. Just a man who saw something wrong and couldn't ride away from it. Most men would have. We've been through that already. A ghost of a smile touched Catherine's split lips. Yeah, we have. The afternoon passed slowly. Xavier stayed close, alternating between the examining room and the porch, watching for Thomas's return. Sarah brought food that neither of them had much appetite for. Dr. Wilson worked on his written account documenting years of injuries and suspicious explanations. As the shadows lengthened, Xavier made his decision. I'm going to see the Reverend, he told Catherine. You'll be safe here with the Wilsons. And if Thomas comes back? He won't. Not tonight. He's got lawyers to talk to, judges to bribe. That takes time. Xavier squeezed her hand. But I'll be back before dark. The Methodist church was a modest building on the edge of town, its white steeple visible above the rooftops. Xavier found Reverend Mills inside, arranging hymnals in the pews. Can I help you, friend? Mills was younger than Xavier expected, maybe 30, with earnest eyes and the soft hands of a man who'd never worked cattle. But there was steel in his spine, a firmness in his stance that suggested he wasn't easily pushed around. Name's Xavier Nash. I need to talk to you about Thomas Norwood. The Reverend's expression shifted. I see. Close the door, please. Once they were alone, Mills gestured to a pew. I've heard things, Mr. Nash. Rumors about what happened to Mrs. Norwood. Is it true? Every word, and then some. Xavier told him everything, the finding the injuries, Thomas's threats, the sheriff's corruption. Mills listened without interrupting. When Xavier finished, the Reverend sat in silence for a long moment. I've suspected something was wrong since I arrived, he finally said. Mrs. Norwood would come to services always sitting in the back, always leaving before I could speak with her, always with new marks she tried to hide. His hands clenched in his lap. I prayed for guidance. I prayed for an opportunity to help her. This is your opportunity. What exactly are you asking me to do? I need someone this town will listen to, someone who ain't bought and paid for. If you stand up in that pulpit and tell people the truth about what Thomas Norwood has been doing, you're asking me to destroy a man's reputation. I'm asking you to save a woman's life. Mills rose and walked to the altar, his back to Xavier. Thomas Norwood has been generous to this church. His donations helped repair the roof last winter. Blood money. Perhaps. The Reverend turned. But the roof doesn't leak anymore. The pews are warm on Sunday mornings. His money has done good, whatever its source. Xavier felt his anger rising. So you'll look away too, like everyone else in this town. I didn't say that. Mills held up a hand. I'm simply wrestling with my conscience, Mr. Nash. Give me a moment. The silence stretched. Outside, a horse whinnied. Somewhere in town, a woman laughed. My father was a violent man, Mills said quietly. He drank, and when he drank, he beat my mother. I was too young to stop him, too weak to protect her. He met Xavier's eyes. She died when I was 12. He'd hit her so hard she fell and struck her head on the hearth. An accident, they called it. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be understanding. I became a minister because I wanted to believe that God would protect the innocent, that justice would prevail without my intervention. Mills' voice hardened. But sometimes God needs men to be his hands. Sometimes justice needs to be carried. Then you'll help. I'll do more than help, Mr. Nash. I'll bring the fire and brimstone down on Thomas Norwood's head. The Reverend's eyes blazed with righteous anger. Sunday, this Sunday. The whole town will be there, Thomas included. He never misses a service. It's good for his reputation. What are you planning? A sermon about truth, about men who hide darkness behind respectable faces, about the sacred duty we have to protect the vulnerable among us. Mills smiled grimly. I may not be from here, but I've learned enough in 6 months to know I'm not the only one with suspicions. People just need permission to speak. Xavier stood and extended his hand. Reverend, you might just be the answer to a prayer. Mills clasped his hand firmly. God works in mysterious ways, Mr. Nash. Sometimes he sends angels. Sometimes he sends cowboys. The walk back to the doctor's office felt lighter somehow. For the first time since finding Catherine in that grass, Xavier felt like they might actually have a chance. Then he turned the corner and saw the smoke. It was coming from the doctor's office. Xavier broke into a run. Xavier's boots pounded the dirt as he ran. The smoke was thickening now, black coils rising from behind the doctor's office. Catherine. He rounded the corner and nearly collided with Sarah Wilson, who was beating at flames with a wet blanket. The fire had caught on a pile of rubbish stacked against the back wall, too neat, too deliberate to be an accident. Where is she? Xavier grabbed Sarah's arm. Inside, Samuel's with her. Sarah's face was streaked with soot. Someone threw a torch. I saw him running toward the alley. Xavier snatched the blanket from her hands. Get water, get help, go. He attacked the flames while Sarah ran. The fire had spread to the wooden siding, crackling and spitting as it climbed. Xavier beat at it, cursing, feeling the heat sear his skin. Dr. Wilson appeared with a bucket. Then another man Xavier didn't recognize. Then 2 more. Keep it off the walls, Wilson shouted. Don't let it reach the roof. For 10 desperate minutes they fought. Bucket after bucket. Blanket after blanket. Xavier's arms screamed with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not with Catherine inside. Finally, mercifully, the flames died. Xavier dropped the ruined blanket and pushed past Wilson into the building. Catherine was pressed against the far wall of the examining room, her face white with terror. It was him, she whispered. Thomas sent someone. I know. Xavier crossed to her, checking for injuries. You hurt? No. But Xavier, if the fire had spread, it didn't. He took her hand, steadying her. You're safe. For how long? Her voice cracked. He won't stop. He'll never stop. Xavier didn't have an answer for that. Dr. Wilson entered, his face grim. We need to move her. Tonight. If Thomas is willing to commit arson with half the town watching. Where? Xavier demanded. Where in this town is safe from him? The church, a voice said from the doorway. Reverend Mills stood there, his coat dusty from running. I saw the smoke. Is everyone all right? For now, Xavier said. You serious about the church? It's sanctuary. Even a man like Norwood wouldn't violate that. Mills looked at Catherine. Mrs. Norwood, you'd be welcome to stay in the rectory. Mrs. Mills and I have a spare room. Catherine's eye moved between the men, calculating risks. He'd know where I was. Yes. But he couldn't touch you there, not without bringing the whole town down on his head. He just tried to burn down a doctor's office, Xavier pointed out. You think a church will stop him? A building, no. But an idea. Mills stepped forward. Thomas Norwood's power comes from fear and silence. We break the silence, we break the fear, we break him. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders, and Xavier saw something new in her face. Not just fear anymore. Something harder, something fiercer. All right, she said. Take me to your church, Reverend. Let's see if God's house can protect me better than my husband's did. They moved under cover of darkness. Xavier carried Catherine. She still couldn't walk far without pain, while Dr. Wilson and the Reverend flanked them. Sarah had stayed behind to tend to the damaged building and spread the word about what Thomas had done. The rectory was small but comfortable. Mrs. Mills, a plump woman with kind eyes, had already prepared the spare room. You poor dear, she murmured, helping Catherine into bed. What that man has put you through. Thank you, ma'am. I know this is dangerous for you. Dangerous, Mrs. Mills snorted. I've faced down tornadoes and locusts and a cholera outbreak in '68. One angry shopkeeper doesn't scare me. Despite everything, Catherine almost smiled. Xavier stood guard outside the rectory that night. He didn't expect Thomas to try anything. So soon the fire had been a warning, not a serious attempt. But he wasn't taking chances. Around midnight, footsteps approached. Xavier's hand moved to his Colt. "Who's there?" "Easy friend." A figure emerged from the shadows. "Name's Jeb Hollow. I work the livery down the street." "What do you want?" Jeb stopped a few feet away, hands visible in the moonlight. "Heard what happened at the Doc's place. Heard what Norwood did to his wife, too." "Lot of people heard. Nobody's doing nothing about it." "That's why I'm here." Jeb spat into the dirt. "Norwood's been squeezing this town for years, overcharging on goods, running competitors out of business, and everyone just takes it. Because of what happened to Wilkins." Xavier straightened. "You know about that." "Everyone knows. We just don't talk about it." Jeb moved closer, lowering his voice. "But this, beating his wife near to death and leaving her for the coyotes, that's different. Some of us are tired of being scared." "How many is some?" "Enough. 10, maybe 15 men who testify to things they've seen, things Norwood's done over the years. If someone was willing to stand up first." Xavier studied the man's face. "Why come to me?" "Because you're the one standing outside a church at midnight, protecting a woman you just met. That tells me something about what kind of man you are." Xavier considered this. If I got those men together, would they really talk? Get us in front of a judge who ain't in Norwood's pocket and yeah, we'd talk. There's the problem. Judge Parker's crooked as a dog's hind leg. Jeb grinned. "Parker ain't the only judge in Montana Territory. There's a circuit judge due through Helena next month. Name's Crawford. Got a reputation for being hard but fair. Helena's a long way from here. Norwood's arm don't reach that far." Jeb extended his hand. "Think about it, Mr. Nash. You've got more allies than you know." Xavier shook his hand. "I'll think about it." After Jeb left, Xavier remained at his post, mind churning. A circuit judge. Multiple witnesses. A real chance at justice if they could keep Catherine alive long enough to see it. Morning came slowly. Xavier had dozed against the rectory wall, waking at every sound. When sunlight finally crept over the rooftops, he stretched his stiff muscles and went inside. Catherine was already awake, sitting at the small table in her borrowed room. She looked better this morning. The swelling had gone down more, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "You look like you slept in a ditch," she said. "Felt like it too." Xavier sat across from her. "Got some news. Might be good." He told her about Jeb Hollow, about the other men willing to testify, about the circuit judge in Helena. Catherine listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You want to take this to another judge." "I want to take it to a judge who'll actually listen. That means keeping me hidden until next month. That means Thomas having weeks to plot to scheme to. That means building a case so strong, even his money can't beat it." Xavier leaned forward. "Catherine, if we go after him here with Jenkins and Parker in his pocket, we lose. Simple as that. But if we gather enough evidence, enough testimony, and take it somewhere he can't control, we might actually win." "We might." Catherine's fingers traced a pattern on the table. "When I married Thomas, I thought I was getting a fresh start. My father had just died. I had nothing, no money, no prospects, no family. His letters were so charming, so full of promises. You couldn't have known." "No, but I should have seen the signs sooner. The way he controlled everything. The money, the meals, who I could talk to, where I could go. Little things at first." Her jaw tightened. Then, not so little. "It ain't your fault. I know that now. Took me 3 years, but I know it." She met his eyes. "What I don't know is why you care so much. And don't tell me again about your stepmother. There's more to it than that." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "My father spent his whole life trying to bring justice to people who couldn't get it themselves. Circuit judge in Missouri. Rode from town to town, hearing cases, settling disputes. Dangerous work. What happened to him? Shot. By a man he'd sentenced to hang for killing his wife." Xavier's voice was flat. I was 19. Found him bleeding out on the courthouse steps. He died in my arms. Oh, Xavier. His last words were about Ma, about my stepmother. He said, I couldn't save her from her first husband, but I gave her peace after. That's all any of us can do. Then he was gone. Catherine reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was gentle, careful, the touch of someone who'd learned to fear gentleness. So that's why you do this. For him. For him. For her. For you. Xavier's fingers curled around hers. And because some things are just right even when they're hard. The moment stretched between them. Xavier became aware of how close they were, of the warmth of her hand, of the way her good eye searched his face. Then the door burst open. He's here. Mrs. Mills stood in the doorway, pale and breathless. Thomas Norwood. He's at the church with Sheriff Jenkins. They're demanding to see Catherine. Xavier was on his feet instantly. Stay here. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Xavier. Promise me. Catherine nodded, her face tight with fear. I promise. Xavier strode through the rectory and into the church proper. Through the open front doors, he could see them. Thomas Jenkins and two other men Xavier didn't recognize. They stood at the base of the steps like an invading army. Reverend Mills was already there, blocking the entrance with his body. This is a house of God, the Reverend was saying. You have no authority here. I have every authority. Thomas's voice carried clearly. My wife has been taken from me by force. I have papers. Papers signed by a judge who owes you money. Xavier stepped through the doors, positioning himself beside Mills. Those papers ain't worth the ink they're written on. Thomas's eyes locked onto Xavier with pure hatred. You again. Me again. And again until you face justice for what you've done. What I've done? Thomas laughed a harsh, ugly sound. I'm a respected businessman, a pillar of this community. You're a drifter, a vagrant, a man with no stake in this town. He gestured to the crowd that had begun gathering on the street. Who do you think these people will believe? They'll believe the truth. They'll believe what they've seen with their own eyes and been too scared to talk about. Scared. Thomas's smile turned vicious. They're not scared. They're sensible. They know what happens to people who cause problems in my town. Like Wilkins. The name landed like a slap. Thomas's face went rigid. What did you say? Wilkins. The trapper who told you to treat your wife better. Found dead in the river 2 weeks later. Xavier raised his voice so the crowd could hear. Everyone knows you had him killed. They just don't talk about it. Well, I'm talking about it now. Murmurs rippled through the gathering townsfolk. People exchanged glances, nervous, uncertain, but no longer completely silent. That's slander, Thomas hissed. It's truth, and I got witnesses who'll swear to it. Witnesses? Thomas spat the word. What witnesses who in this town would... That's for a judge to hear. A real judge, not Parker. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Fear calculation. Xavier couldn't tell. Sheriff? Thomas set his voice tight. Arrest this man. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. On what charge? Kidnapping. He's holding my wife against her will. She's in sanctuary, Mills interjected. She came here of her own free will, seeking protection from her husband's violence. Violence. She's my wife. I have the right. You have no rights here. Mills's voice rang out strong and clear. This is God's house, and in God's house, we protect the innocent from those who would do them harm. The crowd had grown larger now. 50 people, maybe more. Xavier spotted Jeb Hollow near the back, watching intently. Near him stood others, men who'd nodded along when Jeb spoke of testifying. Men who were tired of being afraid. This is ridiculous, Thomas snapped. Jenkins, do your job. The sheriff looked at the crowd, then at the church, then back at Thomas. His face was slick with sweat. "Tom, maybe we should come back later. Talk this through." "I'm not coming back later. I want my wife now." "She ain't your wife no more." Xavier stepped down from the church steps, facing Thomas directly. "Not in any way that matters. She's a free woman, and she's gonna stay that way." "She's mine." Thomas's voice dropped to something dangerous. "She'll always be mine. And when I get her back..." "You ain't getting her back. Ever." Xavier stood so close now he could see the veins pulsing in Thomas's neck. "So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna walk away. You're gonna go back to your store and your crooked friends, and you're gonna wait. Because justice is coming for you, Thomas. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But it's coming. You think you can threaten me? I don't threaten. I promise." The two men stared at each other. The crowd held its breath. Then Thomas smiled that cold, calculating smile Xavier had seen before. "You know what? You're right." He stepped back, adjusting his coat. "I'll walk away, for now. But remember this, Mr. Nash, you're not the only one who can make promises." He turned and strode through the crowd, which parted before him like water around a stone. Jenkins hesitated, shot Xavier a look that might have been warning or apology, then followed. The tension broke. People began talking among themselves, voices low but excited. Something had shifted. Something important. Mills put a hand on Xavier's shoulder. That took courage. Wasn't courage, was stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. The Reverend glanced at the crowd. You've given them something they haven't had in a long time. What's that? Hope that things can change. Mills smiled grimly. Now we just have to make sure we deliver on that hope. Catherine was waiting in the rectory doorway. She'd watched everything through the window. "You shouldn't have come out here," Xavier said. "I had to see." She was trembling, but her voice was steady. "I had to see someone stand up to him." "Now you've seen it." "I have." She looked at him with something new in her eyes, something that went beyond gratitude. "Xavier Nash, I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life, but I thank God every moment that you did." Xavier didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and led her back inside. The rest of the day passed in tense watchfulness. Xavier expected retaliation, another fire maybe, or something worse, but Thomas stayed quiet. That worried Xavier more than open aggression would have. Jeb came by that evening with news. "Norwood's been sending telegrams," he reported. "Lots of them, to Helena, to Butte, even to Virginia City." "What kind of telegrams?" "Don't know. Telegraph operators in his pocket. But it ain't good whatever it is." "He's calling in favors," Catherine said. She'd joined them in the church's small meeting room, insisting she was strong enough. Building his defense, or his offense. "Then we need to move faster." Xavier turned to Mills. "That sermon you were planning for Sunday, can you make it bigger? Bigger how?" "You said people need permission to speak. Give them that permission. Call them out. Name what's been happening in this town. Make it impossible for anyone to stay silent anymore." Mills considered this. "That's dangerous. If it doesn't work. If we don't try, Catherine dies. Maybe me too. And things go back to the way they were, only worse." "He's right," Catherine said quietly. "Thomas won't stop until he's destroyed everyone who defied him. The only way out is through." Mills looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Sunday morning. I'll give them a sermon they'll never forget." The next 3 days crawled by. Xavier split his time between guarding Catherine and gathering information. He met with Jeb and the other men who'd agreed to testify, collecting their stories, building his case. The evidence was damning. Price fixing at the mercantile, threats against competitors, bribes to Jenkins and Parker, and whispers, always whispers, about Wilkins and others who'd crossed Thomas and ended up dead or disappeared. "It's enough," Xavier told Catherine the night before Sunday. "With all of this, a fair judge would have to act. If we can get to a fair judge." We will. One way or another. Catherine was sitting by the window wrapped in a shawl Mrs. Mills had lent her. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow and green, and the swelling was almost gone. She was starting to look like herself again, whoever that was. Xavier, I need to tell you something. He waited. When the beatings first started, I prayed. Every night I prayed for someone to help me. For months, years I prayed, and nothing happened. Nobody came. Her voice caught. I stopped believing, stopped praying, stopped hoping. And now I don't know what I believe. But I know this, you're the answer to a prayer I gave up on long ago. She turned to face him. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever happens after, I need you to know that. Xavier crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair. Catherine, I ain't no angel. I'm just a man who couldn't ride past someone who needed help. That's exactly what an angel would say. Then angels are stubborn fools who don't know when to quit. She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound of it did something strange to Xavier's chest, made it tight and loose at the same time. When this is over, she said softly, what will you do? Hadn't thought that far. Liar. He met her eyes. All right, I've thought about it. Thought about maybe staying around for a while. Fort Benton ain't a bad town when it ain't being run by a monster. Staying around. Catherine's voice was careful. Any particular reason? Xavier reached up and touched her cheek gently, so gently, where the worst of the bruises had been. Reckon I found something worth staying for. Catherine's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, brief, a question more than a statement. When she pulled back, her eyes were full of uncertainty. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Xavier's voice was rough. Don't ever apologize for that. I haven't. Thomas never. I know. And I ain't rushing nothing. But when this is done, when you're safe and free and he can't touch you ever again. Yes. The word came out fierce. Yes. Whatever the question is, yes. Xavier smiled a real smile, the kind he hadn't worn in years. Then we better make damn sure tomorrow goes right. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. By 9 o'clock, the church was full. Every pew packed, people standing along the walls, more crowding at the doors. Thomas Norwood sat in his usual spot in the third row, dressed in his finest suit. He looked calm, confident, a man who believed he had nothing to fear from a preacher's words. Catherine was hidden in the rectory. Xavier stood near the back of the church, positioned where he could see both Thomas and the exits. Reverend Mills took his place at the pulpit. The congregation fell silent. Brothers and sisters, he began, I want to talk to you today about truth. About the lies we tell ourselves and the sins we allow to flourish in our silence. Thomas shifted slightly in his seat. There is evil in this world. We all know this. But the worst evil isn't the kind that comes roaring and obvious. The worst evil is the kind that wears a respectable face. That sits in our churches and runs our businesses and convinces us day by day that what we see with our own eyes cannot possibly be true. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. I have been in this town for 6 months. In that time, I have heard things, seen things, things that keep me awake at night praying for guidance. Mills gripped the pulpit. A woman in this town was beaten nearly to death by her husband and left in the wilderness to die. This is not rumor, this is fact. And the man who did it sits among us today untouched by justice because we have allowed him to become untouchable. Thomas rose to his feet. This is outrageous. Sit down, Mr. Norwood. Mills's voice cracked like a whip. You will have your chance to speak, but not in God's house. Not today. The congregation held its breath. Thomas stood frozen, his face purple with rage. Then slowly he sat. Mills continued. For too long, this town has been ruled by fear. Fear of speaking out. Fear of being next. Fear of the man who holds our debts, who supplies our goods, who has made himself indispensable while making himself monstrous. Today, that fear ends. A woman in the front row stood suddenly. The Reverend's telling truth. Thomas Norwood cheated me out of $50 last spring, and when I complained, he said my husband would have an accident if I didn't keep quiet. Another voice called out. He threatened my family too, said he'd burn our barn. Then another and another. It was like a dam breaking. Years of silence, years of fear, all rushing out at once. Person after person stood telling their story, pointing at Thomas with shaking fingers. Xavier watched Thomas's face transform. The confidence crumbled. The mask slipped. For the first time, he looked like what he truly was, a small, cruel man, facing the consequences of his cruelty. Thomas jumped to his feet and pushed toward the aisle. This is lies, all of it. Then let a judge decide. Xavier stepped into his path. A real judge, one you ain't bought. You. Thomas's voice shook with rage. You did this. You turned them against me. No. You turned them against you. I just gave them permission to say so. Thomas lunged. His fist caught Xavier across the jaw, snapping his head back. Xavier tasted blood. He smiled. There's the real Thomas Norwood. Take a good look, folks. This is what your respectable businessman looks like when he don't get his way. Thomas swung again. Xavier caught his wrist twisted and brought him down hard on the church floor. I'm placing you under citizen's arrest, Xavier said loud enough for everyone to hear. For the attempted murder of Catherine Norwood, for assault, for arson, and for whatever else these good people want to testify to. Jenkins! Thomas screamed. Sheriff! But Jenkins wasn't moving. He stood near the door, face pale, watching his patron fall. It's over, Roy. This from Jeb Hollow, who'd moved to block the sheriff's path. Time to pick a side. Jenkins looked at the crowd, dozens of angry faces, people he'd protected Thomas from for years. Then he looked at Thomas, pinned to the floor by a drifter who'd ridden into town less than a week ago. I'm done, Jenkins said quietly. I'm done covering for you, Tom. He pulled out his handcuffs and walked toward where Thomas lay. Thomas Norwood, you're under arrest. The church erupted in cheers. Xavier released Thomas and stepped back, his chest heaving. His jaw throbbed where Thomas had hit him. He didn't care. A hand touched his arm. Catherine stood beside him. She'd come out of the rectory against his orders, of course, and now she stood in the church facing her husband, for the first time since he'd left her to die. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. Xavier put his arm around her, feeling her lean into him. We did it. All of us. Thomas was being hauled to his feet, his hands cuffed behind his back. As Jenkins dragged him past, he locked eyes with Catherine. This isn't over, he snarled. You're still my wife. You'll always be No. Catherine's voice was steady. I was never yours, Thomas. I was just too scared to know it. She watched as they took him away, her face calm, her shoulders straight. The congregation surrounded them, then offering congratulations, sharing stories, crying tears of relief. The nightmare that had gripped this town for years was finally ending. But Xavier knew better than to celebrate too soon. Thomas had money connections, friends in high places. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The jail cell door clanged shut, and Thomas Norwood's screams echoed through Fort Benton's single-room sheriff's office. You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? Xavier stood outside the cell, arms crossed, watching the man who'd terrorized this town for years pace like a caged animal. I know exactly who you are, Xavier said. So does everyone else now. Thomas gripped the bars, his knuckles white. This won't stick. I have lawyers. I have friends in Helena. You think a circus in a church changes anything? Reckon we'll find out. You're a dead man, Nash. The moment I get out of here. If you get out. Xavier stepped closer. That's the question, ain't it? All those friends you're counting on, all those favors you're owed, how many of them are going to stand by you now that everyone's talking? Thomas's jaw worked, but no words came. That's what I thought. Xavier turned to leave. She'll never be free of me. Thomas's voice dropped to something ugly. Even if they hang me, she'll spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering if someone I paid is coming for her. She'll never sleep peacefully again. Xavier stopped at the door. You're wrong about that. Catherine's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. Stronger than you, that's for certain. He walked out into the morning sun, leaving Thomas's curses behind him. Catherine was waiting at the church with Reverend Mills and Dr. Wilson. The three of them had been working through the night, organizing witness statements and documenting evidence. How is he? Catherine asked. Scared, trying not to show it. Xavier sat down heavily. He's already making threats. Of course he is. It's all he knows. Catherine's voice was steady, but Xavier caught the slight tremble in her hands. What happens now? Dr. Wilson spread papers across the table. I've sent word to Judge Crawford in Helena. Given the circumstances, the sheriff's involvement, Judge Parker's corruption, he's agreed to come here personally to conduct the trial. When? 2 weeks, maybe less if the weather holds. 2 weeks. Xavier rubbed his jaw where Thomas's punch had left a bruise. A lot could happen in 2 weeks. What about Parker? He asked. He ain't gonna just step aside. He doesn't have a choice. Mills held up a telegram. Crawford's bringing a federal marshal with him. Parker's jurisdiction is suspended pending investigation. Thomas won't like that. Thomas is in a cell. Catherine's voice hardened. He doesn't get to like or dislike anything anymore. Xavier looked at her, really looked. The woman who'd begged him not to let Thomas find her, who'd trembled at the sound of her husband's name, was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone forged in fire. You're different, he said. I'm the same person I always was. I just stopped hiding. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. More witnesses came forward, shopkeepers. Thomas had cheated families. He'd threatened people who'd stayed silent for years out of fear. Jenkins, trying to save his own skin, provided documents from Thomas's office, including the ledger Catherine had mentioned. The evidence was damning. Bribes to officials. Records of payments to men who'd later committed violence on Thomas's behalf. Even a cryptic entry that seemed to reference Wilkins's death. This is enough to hang him twice over, Jeb said, flipping through the ledger. How'd he think he could keep all this and stay safe? Arrogance, Xavier replied. He thought he was untouchable. Nobody's untouchable. He knows that now. Catherine spent hours working with the Reverend's wife, preparing her testimony. She would have to stand in front of the town, in front of Thomas, and tell the truth about what he'd done. Every beating, every threat, every moment of terror she'd lived through. Xavier found her alone one evening, sitting in the church, as the last light faded. You don't have to do this, he said, settling into the pew beside her. We got enough evidence without your testimony. No, I need to do this. Catherine stared at the simple wooden cross above the altar. For 3 years, I kept his secrets, protected him, made excuses. I owe it to myself to finally tell the truth. It's going to be hard, having everyone here. I know. She turned to face him. But I spent so long being ashamed of what he did to me. Like it was my fault. Like I deserved it somehow. Her voice cracked. I don't want to feel that shame anymore. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of man Thomas Norwood really is. Xavier took her hand. Then I'll be right there with you. Every word. Promise. Promise. Judge Crawford arrived on a Tuesday, his federal marshal riding beside him. Crawford was a tall man, silver-haired and stern-faced, with eyes that seemed to weigh everything they looked at. He wasted no time. I've reviewed the evidence, he told the assembled townspeople that afternoon. Trial begins tomorrow morning. Mr. Norwood will be charged with attempted murder assault, arson, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to commit murder in the matter of one Jacob Wilkins. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Wilkins charge hadn't been public knowledge. Thomas, brought from his cell in chains, went pale. That's a lie, I never— You'll have your chance to speak, Mr. Norwood. Crawford's voice cut like a blade. In court, under oath. Until then, I suggest you stay silent. The night before the trial, Xavier couldn't sleep. He sat on the church steps, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Footsteps approached. Catherine. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, sitting beside him. Mind won't stop turning. Mine neither. She pulled her shawl tighter. I keep thinking about what happens after. If he's convicted. When he's convicted. When? A small smile touched her lips. I like your certainty. Ain't certainty. Just stubbornness. Same thing you said once. I must have been feeling wise that day. Catherine laughed softly, then sobered. Xavier, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest. Always am. When this is over, when Thomas is dealt with, what are you going to do? Xavier was quiet for a moment. I've been drifting most of my life. Town to town, job to job. Never had reason to stop. And now? He turned to look at her. In the moonlight, the last traces of her bruises were invisible. She looked young, hopeful, beautiful. Now I got a reason. Catherine's breath caught. You mean? I mean I ain't going nowhere. Not unless you want me to. I don't want that. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't want that at all. Xavier reached up and touched her face, gentle, as he knew how to be. Then I'll stay. Long as you'll have me. That might be a very long time. I'm counting on it. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. Morning came too fast. The trial was held in the town hall, the largest building in Fort Benton. Every seat was filled with people standing 3 deep along the walls. Thomas was brought in first, his hands and feet chained. He'd aged 10 years in the 2 weeks since his arrest. His suit was rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes darting nervously around the room. When he saw Catherine in the front row, something ugly twisted his features. Katie, do not address the witness, Crawford snapped. Another outburst, and you'll be gagged. Thomas fell silent, but his eyes never left Catherine. The prosecution began with Dr. Wilson, who detailed Catherine's injuries with clinical precision. The broken ribs, the defensive wounds, the pattern of old bruises that told a story of years of abuse. In your medical opinion, the prosecutor asked, could these injuries have been caused by a fall or accident? Absolutely not. These injuries are consistent with a prolonged vicious beating by human hands. Next came the witnesses. One by one they told their stories. The threats, the bribes, the fear that had kept them silent for so long. Jeb testified about seeing Thomas's wagon on the road that night, heading away from town with something bundled in the back. I thought it was strange, he said. Middle of the night, no reason for Tom to be out that way. Now I know what he was carrying. Jenkins took the stand and confirmed every accusation of corruption. He named names, dates, amounts. The courtroom gasped when he revealed that Parker had received over $2,000 from Thomas in the past 3 years alone. Why are you testifying against your former associate? The prosecutor asked. Jenkins looked old, defeated. Because I'm tired of being afraid, tired of selling my soul for a man who'd throw me in the river soon as look at me. Then it was Catherine's turn. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high. Xavier watched her settle into the chair, watched her hands grip the armrests, watched her take a deep breath. State your name for the record. Catherine Marie Norwood. Mrs. Norwood, you were married to the defendant for 3 years, is that correct? Yes. During that time, did your husband ever physically assault you? Catherine's eye found Xavier in the crowd. He nodded once, small but certain. Yes, she said clearly. He did, many times. Can you describe these assaults? Catherine began to speak. She started with the first time a slap across the face for burning dinner. Then the second time. The third. The escalation from slaps to punches to kicks. The broken bones. The nights spent huddled in corners too hurt to move. The courtroom was absolutely silent. And on the night of June 14th, the prosecutor continued. What happened? Catherine's voice wavered for the first time. I found lipstick on Thomas's collar. When I asked about it, he went to the table, grabbed a whiskey bottle, broke it. And then he hit me, with his fists, over and over. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept talking. He choked me until I couldn't see. Then he kept hitting me. I don't know how long. I passed out. What happened when you regained consciousness? I was in his wagon. It was dark. He drove for a long time, then stopped. Pulled me out and threw me in the grass. What did he say to you? He said... Catherine's voice broke. He said I'd finally be useful. Feeding the coyotes. A woman in the crowd sobbed. Several men looked like they wanted to climb over the railing and tear Thomas apart. Thomas himself sat rigid, his face a mask of rage. What happened next? The prosecutor asked gently. I woke up alone. I tried to crawl toward the trail. I prayed someone would find me. Catherine looked at Xavier. Someone did. Thank you, Mrs. Norwood. No further questions. Thomas's lawyer, a nervous young man from Helena who'd clearly taken the case only for the money, stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Norwood, isn't it true that you were planning to leave your husband? I'd thought about it, yes. And isn't it possible that you staged this incident to gain sympathy and escape your marriage? Catherine stared at him. I staged having my ribs broken. I staged being choked until I passed out. I staged being left for dead in the wilderness. I'm simply suggesting. You're suggesting I would do this to myself. Catherine's voice turned to ice. Look at me. Look at what he did. No one would choose this. The lawyer withered under her gaze. No further questions. Judge Crawford called a recess. Xavier pushed through the crowd to reach Catherine. You did good, he said, taking her hands. Real good. I couldn't have done it without you there. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading. Is it almost over? Almost. Just the closing arguments. Then the verdict. The closing arguments were brief. The prosecutor laid out the evidence in devastating detail. Thomas's lawyer made a half-hearted plea for reasonable doubt that convinced no one. Then Crawford addressed the jury, 12 men from Fort Benton and the surrounding territory. You've heard the evidence. You've heard the testimony. Now you must decide, is Thomas Norwood guilty of the crimes he's been charged with? Take all the time you need. The jury filed out. The crowd began to murmur, speculating, arguing, praying. Xavier led Catherine outside, away from the noise. How long do you think they'll take? She asked. Don't know. Could be hours. Could be... The courthouse door banged open. A clerk rushed out. They're back. The jury's back. Xavier and Catherine exchanged glances. It had been less than 20 minutes. They hurried back inside just as the foreman stood. Have you reached a verdict? Crawford asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. Catherine's hand found Xavier's, squeezing hard. On the charge of assault, guilty. On the charge of arson, guilty. On the charge of bribery, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Jacob Wilkins. The foreman paused, looking directly at Thomas. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. People cheered, cried, embraced. Years of fear and silence finally ending. Thomas lunged to his feet. "This is a travesty. You can't—" "Silence!" Crawford banged his gavel. "Thomas Norwood, you have been found guilty of all charges. For the attempted murder of your wife and the conspiracy to murder Jacob Wilkins, I sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out 1 week from today." Thomas collapsed back into his chair, his face gray. Court is adjourned. Catherine turned to Xavier, tears streaming down her face. "It's over. It's really over." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her close, while the chaos swirled around them. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's over." But even as he spoke, his eyes found Thomas across the room. The man was being dragged away in chains, but he was staring at Catherine with a hatred so pure it seemed to burn. Xavier held her tighter. It wouldn't truly be over until that rope dropped. The week before Thomas's execution was the longest of Catherine's life. She stayed at the rectory, guarded day and night by Xavier and a rotating group of townsmen who'd finally found their courage. Jeb Hollow took the night shifts, his rifle always within reach. Dr. Wilson checked on her daily, monitoring her healing body and her fragile spirit. "You should eat more," Sarah Wilson said, setting a plate of biscuits before Catherine. "Your skin and bones." "I'm not hungry. You need your strength." "For what?" Catherine pushed the plate away. "He's locked up. He's going to hang. What do I need strength for now?" Sarah sat down across from her. "For everything that comes after." Catherine looked up. "What comes after?" "Living dear. Real living. Something you haven't done in a very long time." That night, Xavier found Catherine on the rectory porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer warmth. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Keep having the same dream. Thomas breaks out of jail, comes for me. I try to run, but my legs won't move." Xavier settled into the chair beside her. "He ain't breaking out. Federal marshals got 2 men watching him round the clock." "I know, but knowing and believing are different things." "Yeah, they are." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere in town a dog barked. A baby cried. "Xavier, what was your mother like?" The question surprised him. "My real mother." "Yes." Xavier thought for a moment. "Kind, gentle, used to sing while she cooked, hymns mostly, said music made the food taste better." "How did she die?" "Fever. I was 12. 1 week she was singing in the kitchen, next week she was in the ground." His voice roughened. "Pa never really recovered. Think that's why he married again so fast. Couldn't stand the quiet." "And your stepmother?" "Different from Ma. Quieter, sadder. But she loved my father, and she was good to me." Xavier paused. First husband knocked the joy clean out of her. Pa spent years trying to put it back. Did he succeed? Some days more than others. She'd laugh sometimes, and you could see the woman she might have been. Then something would remind her, a loud noise, a raised voice, and she'd disappear back into herself. Catherine nodded slowly. "I understand that. The disappearing." "I know you do." "Do you think—" She hesitated. "Do you think I'll ever stop disappearing?" Xavier turned to face her fully. "I think you're already stopping. I watched you on that witness stand. That wasn't a woman who was hiding." "I was terrified. Courage ain't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing it anyway." Catherine smiled, a small, fragile thing, but real. "You always know what to say." "Nah, I just repeat what my pa told me and hope it fits." "It fits." She reached for his hand. "Xavier, when this is over, when he's truly gone, I want to start fresh. New name maybe, new life. I don't want to be Catherine Norwood anymore." "What name do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet, but I know whose name I want next to it." Xavier's hand tightened on hers. "That an invitation, Miss Catherine—" It's whatever you want it to be. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Then I accept. The night before the execution, everything went wrong. Xavier was making his rounds when he heard the gunshot. Then another, then shouting from the direction of the jail. He ran. The scene he found made his blood freeze. One of the marshal's men lay in the street clutching his shoulder. The other was slumped against the jail wall, not moving. The cell door stood open. "Thomas!" Xavier shouted into the darkness. "Where is he?" The wounded man pointed toward the edge of town. "Headed east. Someone helped him, came from nowhere." Xavier didn't wait to hear more. He sprinted for the livery, his heart pounding. Thomas was loose. Thomas was free. And there was only one place he'd be going. Rusty was already saddled. Xavier had taken to keeping him ready just in case. He mounted in one fluid motion and kicked the horse into a gallop. The rectory, Catherine. He pushed Rusty harder than he ever had, the wind tearing at his face. Prayers he didn't know he remembered spilling from his lips. Please, please let her be safe. He rounded the corner to the church and his stomach dropped. A figure stood on the rectory porch. A man. And in his grip, held against his chest with a knife at her throat, was Catherine. "There he is." Thomas's voice was wild, unhinged. "The hero, come to save the day." Xavier pulled Rusty to a stop 20 feet away. His hand moved to his Colt. "Don't." Thomas pressed the blade tighter. A thin line of blood appeared on Catherine's neck. "I'll kill her before you clear leather." "Easy." Xavier raised both hands. "Just take it easy, Thomas. Easy, easy." Thomas laughed a horrible broken sound. "They were going to hang me. Tomorrow morning, string me up like a common criminal. Because of you. Because of her. This ain't gonna change that. You kill her, you still hang. Just makes it worse." Worse than dead. Nothing's worse than dead. Thomas's eyes were fever bright. "But I can make sure she goes first. Can make sure you have to watch." Catherine hadn't made a sound. Her face was white, her body rigid, but her eyes found Xavier's and held them. She wasn't begging, wasn't crying. She was waiting. "What do you want, Thomas?" Xavier kept his voice calm, though his blood roared in his ears. "What's your play here?" "I want a horse. Supplies. Enough of a head start that nobody catches me." "And Catherine?" "She comes with me. Insurance." Thomas's grip tightened. "Don't worry, I'll let her go once I'm clear. Maybe. You know I can't let that happen." "You don't have a choice." Thomas backed toward the door, dragging Catherine with him. "Anyone follows me, she dies. Anyone tries to stop me, she dies. Only way she lives is if everyone lets me go." "Thomas?" Catherine's voice was surprisingly steady. "This is over. Whatever happens tonight, it's over. Even if you escape, they'll hunt you. You'll spend the rest of your life running." "Shut up. Is that what you want? Always looking over your shoulder, never sleeping through the night." "I said shut up. That's no life, Thomas. That's just a slower death." Thomas's hand shook. The knife wavered. Xavier saw his opening. "She's right," he said, taking a small step forward. You run forever. But if you surrender now, maybe what? They'll spare my life. Lock me up instead of hanging me." "Maybe." "Liar." Thomas's voice cracked. "They'll kill me no matter what. At least this way I take something with me." "Then take me." The words left Xavier's mouth before he could think them through. Catherine made a sound protest fear, but he kept talking. "Let her go. I'll be your hostage instead. I'm the one you really hate. I'm the one who turned this town against you." "Xavier, no." "Quiet, Catherine." He never broke eye contact with Thomas. "What do you say, man to man? Let her walk away, and I'll come with you willingly. No tricks." Thomas stared at him, calculating. "You'd do that, trade your life for hers. without thinking twice. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Confusion, maybe. Or something deeper, the realization that he was facing something he'd never understood, never could understand. "You love her," Thomas said slowly. "You actually love her." "I do." "I never did." The admission came out flat, almost wondering. "I thought I owned her. Thought that was the same thing." He looked at Catherine as if seeing her for the first time. "Was it always that bad being married to me?" Catherine's jaw trembled. "From the second month." "Why didn't you leave?" "You know why." "Yeah." Thomas's voice dropped. "I guess I do." For a moment, just a moment, he looked like a different man. Tired, lost, almost human. Then the moment passed and his grip tightened again. "Doesn't matter now. Too late for—" A shot rang out. Thomas jerked. The knife clattered from his fingers. He looked down at the red bloom spreading across his chest, then up at something behind Xavier. "That's for Jacob Wilkins," a voice said. Xavier spun. Reverend Mills stood at the corner of the church, a smoking pistol in his hand. His face was pale, but determined. "He was going to kill her," the Reverend said almost to himself. "I couldn't. I had to." Thomas slumped against the doorframe, sliding down to sit on the porch. His hands pressed against the wound, but blood poured through his fingers. Catherine scrambled away from him, and Xavier caught her, pulling her close. "Don't look," he said. "I want to look." She turned in his arms, facing her dying husband. "I need to." Thomas's breath came in wet gasps. His eyes found Catherine's. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I don't know why." "I know," Catherine said, and somehow impossibly her voice was gentle. "I know you don't. Does it hurt when you can't stop yourself?" "Every single day." Thomas nodded, like this made sense, like this was the answer he'd been looking for. "I didn't mean to be this way," he said. I wanted to be." His eyes went unfocused. His hands dropped from his chest. Thomas Norwood died on the porch of a church, reaching for a forgiveness he'd never earned. The aftermath was chaos. The marshal arrived with reinforcements. Dr. Wilson pronounced Thomas dead. The townspeople gathered, murmuring, praying, weeping with relief. Reverend Mills sat on the church steps, his head in his hands. Xavier approached him carefully. "You saved her life." "I took a life." The Reverend's voice was hollow. I never thought I'd—" "He was going to kill Catherine. You did what you had to." "Did I? Or did I just want revenge for Wilkins? For everyone Thomas hurt?" Mills looked up, his eyes wet. "How do I know the difference?" Xavier sat beside him. "My pa used to say that good men question themselves. Evil men don't." He put a hand on the Reverend's shoulder. "The fact that you're asking means you're still a good man." "I don't feel like a good man." "Maybe not. But you feel like a man who did a hard thing for the right reasons. That's got to count for something." Catherine found them there a few minutes later. She'd washed Thomas's blood from her hands, but her dress was still stained. "Reverend," she said softly. "Thank you." Mills couldn't meet her eyes. "Don't thank me, Mrs. Norwood, please." "I'm thanking you anyway." She knelt before him, taking his hands. "You gave me my life back. You gave this whole town their lives back. Whatever you're feeling right now, hold on to that truth." Slowly the Reverend's shoulders straightened. He met her gaze. "You're a remarkable woman, Catherine." "I'm a survivor, that's all." She stood. "And I'd like to keep surviving, if it's all the same to everyone." Xavier laughed, a short, surprised sound that broke the tension. "I reckon we can arrange that." The sun rose over Fort Benton on a town transformed. Thomas Norwood's body was buried in an unmarked grave outside the cemetery. No one wanted him on consecrated ground. His assets were seized and distributed among the people he'd cheated. The mercantile was sold to a young couple from Minnesota who promised fair prices and honest dealing. Sheriff Jenkins resigned and left town the same day. No one tried to stop him. Judge Parker was arrested by the federal marshal and taken to Helena to face charges of corruption. Dr. Wilson and his wife became heroes, their practice suddenly the busiest in the territory. Everyone wanted to be treated by the doctor who'd stood up to Thomas Norwood. And Reverend Mills, despite his private struggle, delivered a sermon the following Sunday that people would talk about for years. He spoke of forgiveness, not the easy kind, but the hard kind. The kind that costs something, the kind that changes you. "We have been through a trial," he said, his voice ringing through the packed church. "Not just in the courtroom, but in our souls. We have faced our own cowardice, our own complicity in evil. And we have chosen finally at great cost to do right." He paused, his eyes finding Catherine and Xavier in the front pew. "Let this be our lesson. Evil thrives when good people stay silent. But when we find our voices, when we stand together against darkness, nothing can defeat us." After the service, Xavier and Catherine walked down to the river. It was the first time she'd been outside without fear in longer than she could remember. "What now?" she asked. "What do you want?" Catherine considered the question. "I want to be happy. I want to wake up in the morning without being afraid. I want to learn who I am when I'm not somebody's punching bag." "Those are good wants. What about you?" Xavier looked out at the water, then back at her. "I want to stop drifting. Want to build something that lasts. Want to spend my days with someone who makes me better than I am." "Anyone in particular?" "Might have someone in mind." He reached into his pocket. "Been carrying this around for a few days. Couldn't figure out the right moment. But I reckon there ain't no perfect moment, so..." He pulled out a simple ring, silver with a small blue stone that matched her eyes. Catherine's breath caught. "I ain't got much," Xavier said. "A horse, a rifle, and whatever wages I can earn. I ain't young, ain't pretty, and I got a stubborn streak a mile wide. But I love you, Catherine, and I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never feel afraid again if you'll let me." Tears streamed down Catherine's face. "Xavier Nash, are you proposing to me?" "Reckon I am, if you'll have me. If I'll have you." She laughed through her tears. "You stubborn, wonderful, impossible man. Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit like it had always belonged there. Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. They were married in the fall, in the same church where Thomas had died. The Reverend performed the ceremony, his voice strong and sure. The whole town came not out of obligation, but out of joy. Dr. Wilson gave Catherine away. Sarah was her matron of honor. Jeb Hollow stood as Xavier's best man, grinning like he'd won a poker championship. "Do you, Xavier Samuel Nash, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Catherine Marie, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Catherine's eyes never left Xavier's face. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Mills smiled. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss that followed was longer than strictly necessary for a church ceremony. Nobody complained. They settled on a small ranch outside of town, purchased with the money from the sale of the mercantile money that had always rightfully belonged to Catherine. Xavier worked the cattle with help from Jeb and other townsmen who'd become friends. Catherine discovered she had a talent for growing things, and soon their little homestead bloomed with vegetables and flowers. The nightmares came less frequently as the months passed. Catherine still woke sometimes, heart-pounding, Thomas's voice echoing in her ears. But Xavier was always there beside her, steady as a rock, ready to hold her until the fear subsided. "Sorry," she'd whisper. "Don't be," he'd always say. "I got nowhere else to be." In time, the bad dreams faded almost entirely, replaced by better ones. Dreams of the future instead of the past. A year after Thomas's death on a bright spring morning, Catherine told Xavier they were going to have a baby. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Xavier? Say something. I'm gonna be a father. You're gonna be a father. He let out a whoop that startled the horses in the barn, then grabbed her and spun her around until they were both dizzy. A baby, he kept saying. Our baby. We're gonna have a baby. I noticed, yes. Catherine was laughing and crying at once. Put me down before you make me sick. He set her down gently, his hands trembling as they moved to her still flat stomach. You think it's a boy or a girl? I think it's too early to know. I hope it's a girl with your eyes. I hope it's a boy with your stubbornness. That's a terrible thing to wish on a child. They laughed together, holding each other in the morning light, full of hope for the first time in either of their lives. The baby came in December on the coldest night of the year. Dr. Wilson delivered her a healthy, squalling girl with her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Hope. It's fitting, Sarah Wilson said, cradling the newborn while Catherine rested. After everything this town's been through, a baby named Hope. She ain't just the town's hope, Xavier said, gazing at his daughter with naked wonder. She's ours. Catherine reached for his hand. Ours. I like how that sounds. Get used to it. You're gonna hear it a lot. As the years passed, the story of Catherine and Xavier became legend in Fort Benton. People told it to their children and grandchildren, the tale of a woman who survived unspeakable cruelty and the cowboy who rode into town and changed everything. Some parts got exaggerated, as stories do. Some parts got forgotten. But the heart of it remained true. Love can find you in the darkest places. Courage can come from the most broken hearts. And justice, though it sometimes takes too long, eventually finds its mark. Xavier and Catherine lived well into old age, surrounded by children, 3 in all, and eventually grandchildren. Their ranch prospered. Their love deepened. And if Catherine sometimes still woke in the night, reaching for Xavier's hand in the darkness, he was always there. Bad dream, he'd ask. No, she'd say, settling against him. Just making sure you're real. I'm real. I know. I just like to check. On the day Catherine died peacefully in her own bed, surrounded by family, her last words were for Xavier. Thank you, she whispered, for finding me. Always, he said, holding her hand as she slipped away. Always. He followed her 6 months later, going to sleep one night and simply not waking up. The doctor said his heart gave out. His children knew better. His heart had just gone where it belonged. They buried them side by side on the little hill overlooking their ranch. The headstone was simple. Xavier and Catherine Nash found each other in the wilderness and built a home from love. Reverend Mills, old and frail but still preaching, spoke at the funeral. His voice cracked, but his words were clear. Some people search their whole lives for what these two found in each other. They found it in the most unlikely way, through pain, through fear, through a chance meeting on a lonely trail. But they held on to it. They built on it. They proved that even the darkest beginning can lead to the brightest end. He looked at the gathered crowd, children, grandchildren, friends, townspeople. Let their story remind us that it's never too late. Never too late to stand up for what's right. Never too late to find love. Never too late to become the person you were meant to be. The wind picked up as they lowered the coffins into the ground, carrying with it the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. Somewhere a horse whinnied, and in Fort Benton, Montana, the story of the cowboy and the woman he saved continued to be told, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that even in the darkest times, hope could survive. That love could conquer cruelty. That one person finding another person in their moment of greatest need could change everything. And that justice, when it finally came, was worth every sacrifice made to find it. Catherine Marie Nash. Née Brennan had once been left for dead in the tall grass by a man who saw her as property. She had risen, she had fought, she had won. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered.